turnout today. If I've been asked if you could turn your cell phones off at this time so that we're not interrupted, we would certainly appreciate it. I'm very honored here today to speak just before Mr. King, and that's good, because if you speak after him, he really puts a damper on me, I'll tell you. 'Cause but I've known Steve and his wife for over 40 years. Sometimes our political views aren't quite the same, but he's a good person, and his wife's a nice lady. I've known his father that worked at the state radio here in Denison. Very good friends with him. Marilyn's dad sold me my first engagement ring and wedding ring for my wife. So we go back a few years with me and his family. I don't want to talk too long because I can't carry water to this guy. He's so much better than I am at speaking, and I admire him for that. So without too much further ado here, I'd like to introduce our representative, Mr. King.
Thanks a lot. Thanks for the welcome. Thanks, Danny, for the introduction and being part of the team here in Denison, heading it up to step forward with the growth that we need out of our future. And we look back on the past. I brought Denison up just the other day. We were up in a community that needs some help, and they are looking around for the leaders to move their community forward. And they had been bogged down, not because they didn't have enough good ideas, but they didn't have the right people to lead them. And I took them back down through the narrative of how Denison woke up here, and I remember sitting in the city council meeting in September of 1996 as a first-time candidate for the state senate, there to monitor what was going on. And twice had been underwater in 96 in the floods, and the 93 floods, plus actually higher water in 96 twice, and we saw here in 93. And the business people from up and down Highway 30 and around the corner going up the other Boyer River had gone around and collected with a hat all the money they could get. And what it turned out to be was $12,000 in change, some in cash, mostly in checks. I don't know if they rumpled them up on purpose and put them in that old hat on purpose, but it was pretty dramatic for me. And they presented at the city council meeting, and they dumped that hat full of money out in the middle of the table and kind of scattered it a little bit, and they said, that's all we have left. We were able to raise $12,000 in change, and that's all we have left, and if we can't protect ourselves from these floods, we're going to be out of business. And they had been turned down by the federal government, by the state government, by any other door they knocked on, and the city of Denison appropriated $75,000 to clear the trees out of the East Boyer River so the water could flow better down there and we get rid of the water a little faster. That was the first step in the Project Impact Committee that finished second in the nation behind Tulsa, Oklahoma for disaster mitigation that several years later by the time it all got put together. And now you know what happens. That work's all done, or mostly, I guess I'll say, mostly done. And the last time you had the most water to ever come down the Boyer Rivers together, a few people threw a few dozen sandbags and no one else broke a sweat, and Denison stayed dry. That's what happens when leadership steps forward and has a long-term vision and works together. I've seen it happen and been able to participate in it here. And that's very helpful to me looking across these 32 counties and 286 towns that I have the privilege to represent. And I don't get back to Denison often. If I come through here far more often than one would know, but it's always seemed to be on the way to and from places, and sometimes the people that are the closest to you are the ones that you might pay the least attention to. And you know, there's an argument to be made for that. I would argue that sometimes if you look in your family, you wonder why it is that we save our worst behavior for the people that love us the most, and that's because they're the only ones that will forgive us. And so that's why in the family, that's when somebody loses their temper in the family, where they would hold it in a business deal, because the family will forgive you, and the business guy, he'll walk away and go find somebody else. But anyway, I came here we're going to have a regular town hall type of meeting, and I'll talk for a little while and touch some subjects, and we'll turn this over to you, and you can ask your questions, make your comments, and I always say questions, comments, and a little silence will go to criticism. That's all right too. And if I have an idea that can't sustain itself in this public venue, I either need to go back and do some more homework or change my mind. And so there may be a quick piece of the history of what we're dealing with in Washington. I'm going to do that right after I talk about the floods a little more, because a lot of us know what it's like to be underwater. Most of the rest of the country doesn't know that there's a stretch in Iowa, the Missouri River bottom, that if you go downstream from Sioux City a little ways, a typical section there will be about 1.5 miles wide. You go downstream a little further down to Glencoe and Ottawa, it's 8 miles wide. And you get down there just upstream from the Omaha airport, the water is 11 miles wide. And then the levees bring that water together like the middle of an hourglass, and then they widen that through Omaha, Council Bluffs, and Glenwood. And then downstream from Glenwood, it widens out again, 4 to 5 miles wide. And that's typical all the way into Missouri, and for all I know, all the way across Missouri. I don't know the inundation charts. I have not seen downstream from St. Joe. But we know how much television coverage there was over Katrina. I made 4 trips down there myself. Some of my staff went down. I've got pictures of that place. I've gone back down and painted houses and done what I can do down there and try to get a message to them. There wasn't anybody in Iowa standing up in front of a television camera making a case of the poor means. Everybody that I know was filling sandbags or working or planning or building dikes and levees, and we got the news that the water was going to come down that river on the Thursday before Memorial Day, and that it was going to peak out sometime, I think the 14th of July was when the discharge was maxing out at 150,000 cubic feet per second. And then a couple of weeks later, they upped it to 160,000. And so they had 2 or 3 weeks to get ready for that kind of flooding. And the notice came the Thursday before Memorial Day when some people were already checking out and they hooked up to their camper and they were ready to head out on Thursday night and go off for Memorial Weekend. And some of those private sector businesses, they got on the phone and went to work and started to plan and got their engineers to work, and they were hauling dirt on Monday, Memorial Day, to build levees. Some of those levees nearly 1 mile long, and a lot of them well up above the old levees. That's high enough as they needed to be. CF Industries, the fertilizer plant, is one of them, with a road that's about 0.8 of a mile long, a levee all the way around. They drilled wells inside, 14, I believe it was 14 wells, 30-inch diameter, set a pump up in each one to dewater the inside and pump it over. Those kind of things happen time after time, place after place, all the way up and down this river. And hardly anybody in Washington, D.C. knows that we're still underwater. And we have begun the 3rd month of being underwater. Water that's hill to hill, water that is 10, 12, 16, 18 feet deep, water that's not sitting there stagnant like a 2-month-old flood would. It doesn't smell like a 2-month-old flood to me. It's relatively fresh water, just pretty much the same quality that's discharged out of Gavin's Point Dam at the rate that is the maximum rate that they can get through Oahe, 150,000 cubic feet per second. And it's more water to come down the Missouri River than has ever come down before. And that's, you can either calculate that by the month or the season, and it's still more than ever before. They built the Pick-Sloan program, the 8 dams in the upper Missouri River, for the purposes of protecting us from the largest runoff we had ever experienced, which is 1881. The 1881 levels and the flow that they calculated is why they set the level of those dams. And now the Corps of Engineers is required to manage the storage and the flood protection in the 6 dams in the Pick-Sloan program, according to the Master Manual, is the shorthand for it, the Master Manual. The Master Manual had 5 different versions. It means it's been changed 4 times. The last time it took 14 years to get the Master Manual changed. It started in 1989, and Danny can do the math. I'm just going to let you figure it out. But 14 years, but always in each of those 5 versions, the flood storage, there's 2 different categories, added up together though, has not changed. 16.3 million acre feet of water. That's water a foot thick on a full acre is how they measure the volume. They've always protected us with 16.3 million acre feet of water, and they always have had to dial it down to the beginning of the flood season, which is calculated to be March 1st. Well, they had done so, they were in the process of doing that, and then they got extraordinarily heavy snows all across the upper area in the mountains where they run into the Missouri. And they had early spring rains, and lots of them that saturated the soil and ran off. And all of that sitting there and still manageable until they got exceptional, they got a whole year of rain in Billings, 8 and 10 inches of rain and even 12 inches of rain across that whole area, Billings, Montana and beyond, which that happened on the Sunday and the Monday before Memorial Day. It took a couple, 3 days to digest what had happened and see if they actually believed the data, do the calculation. That's why the Thursday before Memorial Day we found out they were going to open up the discharge and that we were going to be underwater for a long time. So last Thursday, I just came to the conclusion that FEMA denying individual disaster assistance for Iowans because of a formula that we didn't know existed. And the formula of 150 homes, I believe was the number, worked pretty good for Cedar Rapids and Iowa City. That was the standard. We had a lot more than that were destroyed. And there's a different formula for people in Nebraska. So we were turned down for individual FEMA assistance, even though we have hundreds of homes that are standing in water up to their eaves. So I thought there's two equations here. One of them is the empirical data standard equation. And so you go out, you measure the damage, you turn it into FEMA, and FEMA says yes or no. Okay, if it was all just information and data, then there isn't any reason for me to even have an opinion on it. We'll just let matters take their own course. But I also believe that there's a political equation to this. And that's why we set up we call it a little flotilla last Thursday. Set up 4 boats to go in at Mormon Bridge. We drove across the Mormon Bridge and then put in on the Iowa side of the old Missouri River channel. Well, it's going to be the channel again. And put 4 boats in there with the help of the Iowa DNR, who are fantastic to work with, by the way. And I'll put a little plug in for my nephew, Jeremy King, who's a game warden, and he helped to coordinate this and made it work a lot easier. But they put those 4 boats out for us. We had television from Omaha and Sioux City, I think all of it from both cities. And I did some live radio out of there, and we had print media, Sioux City Journal and Council Bluffs Non-Corel at least. The idea was, let's let the rest of the country know what's happening here, that we're underwater. We've been underwater from easily mid-June, and now here we are looking at the tail end of August, and really, maybe there's relief in sight, but I don't know when that's going to happen. At least another month of this, maybe more. So the idea was to up the political equation, and I asked through the media to invite the president for a 3rd time, come to Iowa and come see the flood. The president came to Iowa sometime in June, and I invited him to come see the flood. This time we got a response that said, no, can't make it work. And so he came back to Iowa on his bus tour. We sent him another invitation, no response even to the invitation to come to Iowa. So, okay, if you can't get people to answer their mail, then you talk to them through the media. So I do with my wife, that's what I do with the president. It's true, too. So I asked the president, come to Iowa. And George Bush at least did a flyby at Katrina and looked out the window of Air Force One down to New Orleans. The President of the United States can turn Air Force One over here and fly along the Missouri River, tip a wing down, and look out the window. He doesn't have to pose for a photo op like George Bush did. Just look, so that the people in the administration will understand this is a disastrous flood of proportions that we have never seen. We'll hardly hear a peep out of anyone, and we're going to end up, if we don't push it hard, without an individual disaster declaration, even though Nebraska has theirs. And the people on the Nebraska side of the river pay the same tax rate as they do on the Iowa side of the river. There's no distinction between they'll say Iowa population concentration, our density is greater. Well, it's greater in eastern Iowa, but there isn't a difference in the Iowa and Nebraska side from a population density standpoint, except to say that there's a lot more flooding on the Iowa side of the river and there isn't anybody living there. So, I want to make this argument that people that pay taxes and support other people's disasters also deserve to have some relief for theirs. And it took me a while to get through that point, but I feel better now having said, you know what floods are like here in Denison, and we've really done, as a community, your job to protect this community, and we need to help the folks that are underwater right now. So I'm just going to quickly go through some of the things that you will know, and then maybe it'll spark some discussion. One of them is that you'll know that I put a lot of hours into repealing Obamacare, and I believe that it is an unconstitutional takings of American liberty. I fought that legislation from more than a year before it was passed into law. I thought at the end of that battle, I was exhausted, I had torn up a knee, I was dragging a leg, I hadn't been getting any sleep to speak of, and I was the last one to leave the Capitol that night, and I drug my leg home with me and thought I'll lay here and sleep, and the sleep of the exhausted, and when I wake up, I'll put together a new plan, and I'll be refreshed, and my head will be clear. Well, I couldn't sleep. I did lay down for about 2.5 hours, and I got up and typed up a bill draft request to repeal Obamacare. 40 words. And the last words of that bill, not 2,600 pages, 40 words. The last words of the bill are, as if it had never been enacted. I won't leave any doubt that I don't think any part of it should be salvaged. It'll roll back on us if we leave any part of it. It's like leaving a root to something. So that language, by the way, was an important inspiration for the elections last fall. 87 new freshman Republicans were elected to the House of Representatives, exactly within the vision of our founding fathers, who established that the 2-year elections for House members would be the quick reaction force from the public, and that they would send in people to make dramatic changes if we were all up for election every 2 years. Well, that happened. 87 new freshman Republicans, every single one of them ran on the repeal of Obamacare. And every single one of them and every Republican in the House and Senate voted for my language to repeal it. However, it was killed in the Senate, led by Harry Reid. And now we sit out there in a limbo land of health care. The 11th Circuit the other day found the individual mandate in Obamacare to be unconstitutional. I enthusiastically agree with them in their opinion. I wish I had brought it. It was clear and succinct. I thought Scalia must have written it. Of course, he didn't. He may get an opportunity, though, to write a majority opinion in the Supreme Court. The Obamacare litigation has been delayed by the White House. They should have asked for an expedited review, because here we are now, tens of billions of dollars being poured into something that's being litigated that all of us know that there are 2 judgments on this. One is the Supreme Court, which may throw it all out, and the other one is the Congress that has voted overwhelmingly in the House of Representatives to repeal it, and a very close split decision that went to decide not to repeal it in the Senate. We know where the public stands. There's more and more opposition to it, the more we find out about what's in it, which to some odd, perverse degree makes Nancy Pelosi a little bit right about passing the legislation to find out what's in it. Not for that reason, but now that it is passed, we know a little more about what's in it. And so that has been, an intense endeavor on my part. I will not let up on that. And if the Supreme Court saves us, great. But I still want to pull it out of the code as if it had never been enacted, close quote. And that's one of the pieces that has colored the approach to this Congress. And I believe that the repeal legislation needed to be moved. We did, and that was the second week in January. But I also wrote the language to cut off all funding to implement or enforce Obamacare. I modeled it off for the